As we covered last week, Season 4's premiere episode of Strange New Worlds destroyed a planet, invented humanity, and put a T-Rex on screen, and I for sure thought that was going to be the most outrageous thing this show would do this season. One episode later, and I'm eating my words, because in this one, the show has walked onto a dead starship, switched off the lights, and made what is maybe the single scariest and goriest hour of Star Trek ever produced. The Griffin Incident goes all in on the horror, including skin-crawling body horror, and it also manages to hit each and every emotional beat that takes place in the episode. So let's break down exactly what the hell happened aboard that ship, what the ending means, and whether next week's episode will fill us with dread or relief. Let's dive on in. How a few future legends ended up on a dead ship. We open on a shuttle, not the Enterprise, with James T. Kirk doing a personal log on the way back from a future Federation leader's retreat. It's a convenient way to bring him back into the fray since he's technically still assigned to the Farragut. His traveling companions are Spock and Lon, which is a pretty uncomfortable trio if you think about it. Kirk has no idea that Lon once fell for an alternate timeline version of him back in Season 2, and then had to watch that man blink out of existence while she grieved him quietly for 2 seasons. Plus, Lon and Spock are now together. Kirk, as usual, is oblivious to her clear tension, but Spock notices that Lon seems distracted, but she waves him off. Meanwhile, continuing his voiceover, Kirk admits that though he loves this kind of work, he can't shake the feeling that this is a very wrong place to end up in. Next, they catch a signal in an uncharted area of space, and it leads them to the USS Griffin, a Starfleet ship that vanished without a trace 9 years ago. There were loads of theories about this incident, and the leading one was that it ran into a Klingon bird of prey, and the loss was silently buried. Spock, of course, has his own theory that a stellar fire could have struck it at warp. Nobody actually knows, and no one actually finds out, as we'll soon see. Kirk, being Kirk, wants to find out what really happened without listening to common sense, because sometimes some questions just need to stay buried. I mean, maybe he's never seen a horror movie. What they do find is a completely empty ship. No bodies, no crew, no sign of a struggle, just a vessel that feels like everyone stepped out for a spacewalk and then just never came back. Spock scans for radiation, viruses, parasites, anomalies, anything, and reports the ship is, for all practical purposes, perfectly safe. That should be reassuring, but as we now know, it was a setup for one of the scariest plot twists of the season. The 1-hour clock and the first signs something is wrong. The Griffin abruptly powers itself back on, which makes the life support come back online, and the away team learns that they've got roughly 1 hour before whatever's left in the batteries drains away for good. After all, what's a horror movie without urgency, right? The ticking clock has started, and almost immediately the creepiness begins as well. For example, Kirk keeps hearing a baby crying that nobody else can hear. A pale, ghostly woman materializes long enough to whisper that she's been waiting for them, then vanishes. Spock, hanging on to logic for dear life, detects faint traces of negatively charged ions, and Kirk goes completely unscientific as he cuts to the chase. There's a ghost, or maybe many ghosts. They find a sealed door scorched with phaser marks, and it turns out that the burns come from Starfleet, Klingon, and Vulcan weapons. Can you imagine what must have been locked inside that room that people from such hilariously different backgrounds were trying to blast their way in? Honestly, I didn't even want to know at this point. Just beat me up already, Scotty. Anyways, after that, we get to the medbay, and inside is a stack of body bags, neat, folded, and empty. No sign of life or even death anywhere. That's way more eerie than simply finding bodies, because it could just be that the body bags are only empty for now. Rose Harper and the 3 private nightmares. Whatever is on the Griffin doesn't attack with claws, which is good because how could claws match up with the dinosaurs from last episode? Instead, its chosen weapon is fear, much like Pennywise from Stephen King's It, and it attacks with the thing each person is most afraid of. After Lon and Spock share a quick kiss, the trio splits up. Kirk and Lon on one side and Spock alone, which basically confirms my theory that none of them have ever seen a horror film. As they wander, we see that for Lon, the fear wears the face of Rose Harper, the Griffin's former chief of security. Through the ship's logs, Lon learns that Harper had documented a sickness spreading through the crew. Violent outbursts, delusions, self-harm, but the medical staff had cleared everyone for duty anyways. The logs recount horrifying events. Crew strangled, stabbed, and hundreds beamed alive into open space. Harper insists to Lon that she isn't a con. She's not a monster, and then delivers one of the most chilling lines of an already chilling episode. "You're one of us." Lon ends up leaving Kirk to search for help, but the turbo lift also keeps dragging her back to Deck 17 3 times before she finally goes into it, where she finds blood, construction tarps, and a large knife. Extremely ominous. When we get to Spock, we see that the ship has brought back T'Pring, his estranged former fiancée. She insists she's real, reminisces about a childhood survival ordeal where a Vulcan poet's mantra calmed her, and then shoots him. He wakes strapped to a bed while she calmly explains that his Vulcan half is what holds him back and starts cutting it away, snipping off the point of his ear in a spray of green blood. We've spent so many episodes and even movies focused on Spock's identity crisis, but this body horror element is all new and maybe the most disturbing thing the show has ever put on screen. Kirk's fear is something we've seen him grapple with right from the original Star Trek films. Fatherhood. Because, yeah, he's got a kid. Kirk keeps hearing a crying baby, aka his son David, because back in a previous season, he'd mentioned that his on-again, off-again partner, Carol Marcus, was pregnant. We now learn that Carol is estranged from Kirk, tired of Starfleet, and afraid he'll die somewhere alone in deep space. Kirk bought David a wind-up robot toy to make up for skipping a promised weekend, and the ship weaponizes exactly that guilt, showing him the boy trapped and crying just out of reach. Kirk's fear might be the one that's most likely to come true. It's all too possible that he'll die before he ever reconnects with his family. The false rescue and the ending explained. Just when you think all hope is lost, the Enterprise crew beams aboard. Pike, Una, Ortegas, Uhura, and Kirk's brother Sam. You, me, and the characters all breathe a big ol' sigh of relief, except, and spoiler alert, none of this is real. Things go from a chilling atmosphere and body horror to pure psychological torment. It starts going wrong immediately. Lon, under the ship's influence, sets Ortegas to beam directly into her own body. Uhura barely stops it in time and storms off shaken. Sam and Kirk bond over being absent fathers, and then Sam is sucked out through a cracked observation window, first plugging the hole with his own body, then torn out into the vacuum, with his intestines going first, begging Kirk to tell his kids he loves them. Una slices her own torso open, and her calmness is worse than the blood. Pike, grinning like a man who's lost his mind, cheerfully announces he doesn't have to be captain anymore, and he'll now be a chef. And he just starts chopping off his own fingers like he's dicing vegetables, telling Spock to just listen to the ship because it wants to set him free. Then comes the gut punch. We realize that Lon is holding the knife, menacing Uhura, while Harper welcomes her home. And when Kirk finds Lon and desperately asks if she can hear the crying too, she stabs him, whispering that she hears everything now. As he bleeds, she tells him the ship needs a captain. It shows Harper, now it's choosing her, and taunts that David is going to die exactly like this at the end of a blade, bleeding out in some dark corner of space. Which, okay, this might be the most blatant foreshadowing the show has ever done. In Star Trek III, David Marcus is stabbed to death by Klingons. This is more than just his fear. This is a harrowing reveal of the future that will haunt Kirk for the rest of his life. Finally, Spock breaks free by recognizing that his hallucination of T'Pring was pointing him back towards logic, towards his Vulcan side. He recites that survival mantra and then snaps out of it, and we see him holding the bloody scissors and realizing he mutilated his own ear. There's no monsters who have been attacking them. Whatever bloodiness has happened, they did it to themselves. Or, well, the ship made them do it themselves. But regardless, in the nick of time, Scotty locks onto Kirk's signal and beams them back to the Enterprise. Kirk stabbed, Lon clutching a bloody knife, both in shock. Also, throughout, despite whatever detective work they were doing, the show refuses to explain the Griffin. Were those real ghosts? Mass hallucinations? Some sort of alien intelligence that bonded with the ship and began to feed on fear? We never find out. And that's got to be a deliberate choice, and honestly, it makes the whole thing even scarier. Pike hands the whole case to Division 12, Starfleet's X-Files style department for unexplained phenomena, and notes this is the latest in a string of such referrals, roughly half of which remain unsolved. There's no explanation or even a resolution, just the Griffin being towed away under his orders. The quiet aftermath. Dr. Mbenga confirms Kirk will heal physically, but says that while Spock and Lon are fine in body, the mind is a whole other matter. The next time we see Spock, it's in his quarters, with Nurse Chapel making a house call to sew his ear back on because he can't face the medbay. She asks why it was T'Pring who appeared to him and not her, and honestly, I couldn't figure out if she was jealous or genuinely worried. Whatever the case, Spock's answer that T'Pring was the one who was most capable of drawing out his emotion more or less confirms that there's a lot of unfinished business and unresolved feelings here, even though he and Chapel are now strictly platonic. Meanwhile, Pike visits Lon and tells her that he left her breakdown and the stabbing out of his official report. The only thing that matters, he says, is that she survived, and that's all Starfleet needs to know. Exactly how much has he been leaving out of reports in every episode? Pike also shares a little story about his own past brush with the supernatural to make her feel less alone. Uhura brings Kirk cookies and gives him his family's contact info. To his credit, he does call Carol and David, but it never goes through. The final minute is another chilling one as the Griffin drifts silently in space. Rose Harper watches Lon from her window and raises a finger to her lips. After all, what horror movie ends without leaving space for a sequel? Also, for the record, this episode was written by Robbie Thompson, a supernatural veteran, and it was directed by horror specialist Axel Caroling. Also, it was inspired by the Mary Celeste, the real 19th century ghost ship found drifting and abandoned with no explanation ever found. And honestly, that explains quite a bit, wouldn't you say? What's next? Human best friend predictions. If you're emotionally wrung out after this episode, I've got some good news. The showrunners clearly have a heart, by which I mean episode 3 totally swerves away into comedy. Well, hopefully. It's called Human Best Friend. It lands next Thursday on the 6th of August, and the official synopsis reads, "Shore leave on a pleasure planet turns dangerous when the crew's promised escape stops behaving like fun." Based on that and what's already been confirmed, here's where I think we're heading, and it's pretty damn far from a haunted ghost ship. Basically, this next episode will be the season's designated palate cleanser, and it'll be a full-on buddy comedy. We know from spoiler-free reviews of the season that this episode will focus on Scotty and Ortegas, who have been set up as rivals from the very first episode because Scotty's the one who lives by the rulebook, while Ortegas is the one who exists to tear it up. They're a classic yin and yang duo, much like Spock and Kirk or Kirk and McCoy. You strand them together on a pleasure planet where things go badly wrong, drop in Dave Foley guest starring as a wacky alien host, and you've already got the funnest episode of the season. My prediction is that the entire point of this hour is to force these two opposites to rely on each other, and by the end of the episode, or the end of the season, all their antagonism will switch into genuine friendship. One review called it The Hangover in Space, so expect a drunken, memory-scrambled misadventure where Scotty and Ortegas wake up with no idea what happened the night before and have to retrace their steps, ideally while the pleasure they were promised turns into a threat instead. The plot about the escape no longer behaving like fun is doing a lot of work there. I'd bet the planet's whole hospitality operation, or whatever it is, turns out to have a dark side, and our two leads are the ones who have to sober up and deal with it. It might start out comically, though no promises that it won't veer into darkness sooner or later. We also know the wider crew gets in on the fun, and I'll tell you one specific reason why I'm friggin' excited. Una. It's been confirmed that Human Best Friend is where Rebecca Romaine's #1 does karaoke. In fact, she sings Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart, wait for it, translated into Klingon. Romaine has spoken about how nerve-wracking that was to record, given just how many people actually speak fluent Klingon and would absolutely notice if she got it wrong. Apparently, there's also a moment involving Pike sporting a face tattoo, which tells you the crew's collective common sense was left back on the ship. But the biggest question is, will this be a filler episode, or will the plot lines in this go into future episodes? Honestly, it's hard to say. After the premiere's Cosmic Paradox and this week's Psychological Gut Punch, the season needs to exhale a bit before we get into the back half, where the two overtly time travel titled episodes and the Tomorrow's Enterprise finale are waiting. Plus, there's also that puppet episode. Though I'll remind you that the show has spent a lot of care on Ortegas' trauma after the Gorn attack, and giving her a central role in comedy is a chance to let her be happy and carefree for a little while before she starts bracing for the next disaster. It'll be really nice to see a character who's been carrying a lot finally getting to let go, even if there are eventual consequences. And Scotty's still assembling himself into the legendary engineer we know he becomes, a crisis that forces him to improvise under pressure without any rulebook or guidelines to help him is exactly the kind of thing that builds that man. I know there's some people out there who think it's going to be tonal whiplash, that the change between these two episodes might be jarring, but you have to remember what show you're watching. That's pretty much how Strange New Worlds has been since the very beginning. Every episode has its own genre, its own tone, its own experiment, and it's usually pulled off pretty well. Remember that musical episode in Season 2? People to this day are still split on whether they love it or hate it, and there's no middle ground on the internet. So here's our bet for next Thursday. A drunken planet-side disaster, Scotty and Ortegas forced from enemies to friends, some sort of alien beastie causing havoc, a hidden threat that starts a different ticking clock, and of course, the crew scrambling to save the day. The highlight will probably be Una absolutely committing to the power ballad in Klingon, and even if we're totally wrong about all of this, what we do know for sure is that it'll be lighter, sillier, and exactly what the season needs before we get back to the heaviness. So that's this week's episode. What did you make of the Griffin? Did you think it was real ghosts, or was the ship just messing with their minds and making them see their worst nightmares? And are you ready for next week's hard left turn into comedy after this horror show of an episode? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comment section down below.